You thought it would be easy. Teach them to chart their menstrual cycles, they said. Help them learn to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, they said. And then you saw the charts. You saw things that you didn't even know were possible, and you really don't know how to interpret them. Fortunately, I've created the perfect solution for you. I want to share with you our top resource for women's health professionals, how to interpret virtually any chart your client throws at you. This new resource breaks down complex chart interpretation into an easy step-by-step process. It will give you the tools you need to better support your clients. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/chart to snag your complimentary copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/chart. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 554. Today I'm sharing another brand new episode in my FAMM research series. And today I'm sharing a bit of a unique study. It is a qualitative study. And for those of you who've tuned into previous FAMM research series episodes, you know, qualitative research studies are a little bit different because instead of focusing on straight numbers and data, they're focusing on typically the experiences of their participants in their own words. So I really enjoy it when I find qualitative studies on topics of interest so that we can kind of dig into what women are actually saying about the things that are going on in their lives. And I do think that it does give us some additional insight, especially when it's done in this way. And in many ways, qualitative studies validate our feelings about a number of things or our hunches, and also validate our qualitative experiences, our description and experience of things that have happened in our lives. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's study. So this study is actually based on women's experiences of fertility awareness-based methods. Now, I'll go ahead and say from the get-go that the sample size is really small. And so as a fertility awareness educator who's been in the field for quite a long time, I think that there's certainly opportunity in the future to gather data from far more women to share their experiences about using fertility awareness-based methods. But with that said, I have never seen a study like this, and I do think it's it is called a pilot study. So the title of today's study is a pilot qualitative case study of women's experiences with fertility awareness-based methods. And in this study, they're actually questioning two women specifically about their personal experience using fertility awareness, and certain themes emerged, which we'll go through today. So interestingly, even though it's a small sample size, I have certainly seen very similar themes working with women over the years with respect to their experience of using fertility awareness-based methods. So even though the sample size is small, I think we can still learn a great deal from it. It is useful, I think, however small, when you see case study research that has been published, I think that it's also very useful. And really and truly, it should be a kind of starting or jumping off point further research. So when you start to see these themes in the smaller studies, I feel like in a perfect world, that would really jumpstart research in larger studies to kind of validate those initial findings. So why did these researchers decide to jump in and do this study? In their words, they're wanting to understand a little bit better about the women's journey. So what they say is little is known about women's journey of using fertility awareness-based methods, FABMs, to achieve pregnancy. And they go on to say it's essential that healthcare providers understand women's experiences and perceptions of using a variety of FABMs to achieve pregnancy during this special and important period of time for women and their partners. So the women that they looked at for this particular case study were specifically looking for fertility awareness-based methods with the intent of achieving a pregnancy. So these women were actively trying to conceive, and they were sharing their experiences of using fertility awareness-based methods to help on their journey. So I think that in a nutshell kind of explains where the researchers are coming from. One theme I've pointed out quite a bit in research, even in some of our more recent fertility awareness mastery mentorship FAMM research series, episodes is that often the researchers are, when they're doing data like this, when they're actually finding out what women are saying, they're often doing it with the idea of, you could say, improving healthcare, or you could say helping practitioners to better understand their patients to achieve certain aims. So in this case, they're really wanting to elicit this data of, how are women experiencing these methods to make recommendations for how providers could improve their care. So again, very useful to know where they are coming from. So another reason that they chose this particular topic for the study is that there is, statistically, we are seeing an increase in couples who are trying to achieve pregnancy. And they provide a stat in the study. They say that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported in 2019 that 12.1% of women aged 15 to 44 in the United States have difficulty getting pregnant or carrying a pregnancy to term. And that is right in line with the statistic related to infertility, that about 15% or about 1 in 6 couples struggle with fertility challenges or take longer than average to conceive. So I think they're really highlighting something, because fertility awareness-based methods can improve the chances for many couples. This is a question that came up in one of our recent FAMM calls with our practitioners. And the question was, something like, does fertility awareness just by itself, so just by, tracking the cycle, understanding the fertile window, and simply timing sex correctly, does that improve the chance of conception? And interestingly, there's a number of research studies that look at that question. And typically those types of research studies are designed in a way that they are specifically taking women and couples who have been trying to conceive for some time unsuccessfully. So they will kind of document that. They're starting with populations who haven't been successful over periods of time, typically a year or more. And then, the intervention is to teach them about the cycle using fertility awareness-based methods so that they can really time sex based on the actual fertile window, not what it's assumed to be. And interestingly, in those studies, there's always an improvement in the rate of conception. So just from what I've seen, there are couples out there who have been trying to conceive for whatever reason. They may have been mistiming, and simply by timing correctly, that does improve their chances. Now, of course, this is not the case for all couples who are trying to conceive, because their fertility challenges are multifactorial, but it is something to consider. And of course, one of the reasons why these researchers wanted to look at this question. They do give a little bit of background about fertility awareness-based methods. Of course, they're letting us know how they can help with identifying the fertile window and all the different things. And let's get into then what the experiences were. So they were asking different questions, mostly open-ended questions, to figure out basically what were the pros, what were the cons, what they liked, what they didn't like, and what their experience was with the specific method that they chose. If they tried one method or previous methods, like which one did they land on and why? So it was really interesting how they structured the questions to kind of get at some of those questions. So to give an example, they said things like, tell me a story of how you and your partner came to the decision to start a family. What influenced you in selecting your fertility tracking method? And, give some examples and situations of people that might have influenced your decision to use this particular method. So they were kind of trying to figure out, like, how did you decide this? Who influenced your decision? They also asked the women to share their experience with their chosen method and how their decision to kind of follow this path impacted their fertility journey. So, what happened and have they achieved their kind of ideal family size type of deal? And they did this through interviews that were done face-to-face virtually. So again, I find it really interesting and to see the different types of studies that they can do. And again, I always love finding a study that shares qualitative data. So as I mentioned, they took 2 women through this process, and then they kind of went through all of the answers. And through this process, the researchers really took some time to explain why they chose this way of doing things, and to kind of what they talked about was like the narrative method. So having people share their stories and how that is beneficial. And obviously it's different to the data-driven scenarios. And through a thorough assessment of the data, they found that 5 themes emerged when they were doing these interviews. So I'm going to go through these 5 themes because I think that they're really interesting. And I do, as I said, I have seen these themes emerge when working with clients using different fertility awareness-based methods, I should say. I have seen similar themes, so it was really interesting. So the first theme that they mentioned was having a sense of control. So this is something that generally comes up with fertility awareness-based methods. I mean, our conventional healthcare system takes the control away in many ways because you're not the one driving the car. You go to metaphorically, you go to the healthcare practitioner and they're telling you what to do. They're the ones that have the answers apparently. And so they're going to tell you, you got to do this, you got to do that. You need to take this drug, you need to, have the surgery, whatever. And so the power then lies with them, not necessarily with you. So one of the themes that emerged then was this having a sense of control. It allowed them to track, to understand their body, and it kind of reorient them to a position of greater authority because now they're a participant in this process instead of simply just a passenger in the car, so to speak, that someone else is driving. And of course, one of the themes that came up under that umbrella is having a sense of empowerment, a sense of confidence. Now, as you start to learn more about your body, you just feel more confident about the decisions that you're making. So they were all of a sudden kind of a dynamic and useful participant in this process. And one of the participants, this quote comes from them. She said, rather than just feeling like months were going by and I wasn't getting pregnant, I think I felt like I had more of a sense of why that might be. Like maybe I didn't ovulate that month, or, that we didn't have intercourse at the right time. And so I feel like it helped me understand what was happening with my body more. So again, these participants were trying to conceive, and they had been for a while without the success that they were hoping for in the time frame that they were looking for. But just by tracking their cycles, now instead of feeling kind of lost in the process, they could actually see what was happening. Like, oh, wow, like ovulation happened later, or maybe we didn't time intercourse correctly or whatever. But all of a sudden now this process has been somewhat demystified for them. So the second theme that emerged with these women was experimenting with different methods. And ultimately, when you dive into the fertility awareness world, I think many people are under the assumption that there is one fertility awareness method that everybody follows and everybody agrees on. But of course, that's not the case. When we're looking at fertility awareness-based methods, there are mucus-only methods. There are symptothermal methods. There are symptohormonal methods that use hormone monitoring options as well as some of the fertile signs. There are basal body temperature only options. There are calendar options, modern calendar/rhythm options. So there's a lot of different options. And when you're looking at a vast group of women, there's a lot of different reasons why someone might choose one method over the other. And this is something we always talk about in our FAMM program with our practitioners, because I think we all come into fertility awareness with our personal biases. We know what we've used, potentially what's worked for us. And so when someone is using a different approach or a different method, then we might assume that they're using a lesser method or something that doesn't work as well, because we have our favorites. But ultimately, the best fertility awareness-based method is the one that works for your clients. So this is interesting because, when you looked at the data, some women found that the temperature tracking was just overwhelming. So they would select a method that was predominantly mucus only, or vice versa. And so they kind of shared their experience with that. And again, I think that that's very common in women who are finding their way through navigating fertility awareness-based methods, whether they're trying to conceive or trying to avoid pregnancy. So the third theme that emerged that the researchers identified was overcoming self-doubt. So again, going back to the first theme, which was having a sense of control, they, through this process, as they are learning more, they also experienced periods of uncertainty. I think that especially for women who are trying to conceive, you're starting to chart, you're understanding your cycle better. Now you're timing sex with ovulation and with your fertile window. And of course, that is very empowering. But if you don't conceive that minute, that first cycle or that second cycle or that third cycle that you start to chart, of course, it can feel very, is this working? Is anything making a difference? Is this going to be effective for me? So there were these conflicted feelings of self-doubt that these women did experience, which I would say is very natural, very common. And one of the most challenging things about fertility is that you just don't know exactly which cycle conception is going to take place. I mean, it can be so drastic. It is drastic. You could be trying for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and boom, all of a sudden pregnancy happens. So it can be very challenging during those months leading up to that pregnancy because, of course, you just don't know when it's going to take place. So what helped these women, interestingly, in this situation, based on what the researchers said, was having a better, clearer way to identify ovulation. So in this study, the women started using LH strips within the context of their charting protocols. And they reported that that really helped them to feel a little bit more certainty, potentially because it was helping them to better identify their ovulatory window. And I thought that that was interesting as well, because as I had mentioned earlier, the sample size is small. So there's 2 women that they're looking at. And one of the themes that emerged was like, oh, the BBT is kind of challenging. So I'm going to opt for a method that doesn't really focus predominantly on that. And so many women find that using the basal body temperature, that BBT, is a helpful definitive sign, whereas many women struggle with the mucus sign unless they're using a method that has a really detailed mucus charting system. So it makes sense to me that if we're not really relying on BBT, we're relying on mucus, but maybe the method that we're choosing doesn't provide as detailed and thorough of a charting method, that adding those LH strips would help them to feel a lot more confident identifying the window, because it's always better to have 2 signs versus 1. So whether it's mucus and temperature, whether it's mucus and an LH strip, whether it's temperature and cervical position, it's always helpful to have 2 signs, because then you're able to put them against each other and feel a lot more confident in what's really happening. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So in terms of the self-doubt, there's a quote that I wanted to share from one of the participants. She said, even though I felt like I was kind of sure, I was like, I might as well, like a few days after I end my cycle, just to see what's happening, use the strips. And so I was testing every day and I felt very confident in those strips, I guess. I felt more confident in the strips than I did with checking my cervical mucus, probably because it was quantifiable, I guess. So their experience was having a method, a strategy that provided more clarity, more structure, more consistency, helped them to feel confident. Certainly this has been my experience. I mean, there's the self-doubt of knowing how to confirm ovulation and feeling confident in your observations. And then there's a self-doubt that can occur from the actual process itself of not conceiving. So in terms of supporting clients to feel more confident in their observations so that they know definitively which days are fertile, which days are not, and they can confidently confirm ovulation, even if everything isn't perfect, that I found comes from, with the method that we teach in FAMM, it comes from using a very detailed and specific cervical mucus tracking system so that you can actually feel that confidence about mucus, so that you're not kind of feeling like, what am I looking at? What's going on? We can pretty much define any type of liquid that is coming out of your vagina with this method. So I find that really helps my clients gain that confidence in the mucus piece. We also use additional tools like LH testing when it's appropriate in conjunction with the mucus observations, if that is helpful to the client, and also using basal body temperature and other secondary signs, because often these secondary signs, like whether it's breast tenderness or other things that you may experience, whether it's around ovulation or leading up to your period or something like that, secondary signs in conjunction with some of the main fertile signs that we're tracking can be extremely helpful, again, just as supporting information, supporting data, especially at the beginning of your journey, the supporting data, because we all kind of doubt, is this real? Can I really tell when I'm ovulating? I think that it's natural to do that, especially at the beginning when you're just learning, because it's completely new and you haven't done it before. But all of this supporting information data really can help overcoming the doubt in your observations so that you can feel really confident that you're doing it right and that you're tracking right, that you're having sex at the correct time, that you can identify ovulation. So instead of thinking like, did I ovulate or whatever, like you start to gain that confidence and no, I know I ovulated because I saw this sign and then I saw these things and I see those consistently. And now that I've been tracking for, 4 months, 5 months, I can actually see that this is a pattern for me and et cetera. So that's not a surprise that adding in that additional data helped those women to feel a lot more confident in their observations. Popping into today's episode with a quick question. Do you like paper charting? Today's episode is brought to you by the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook. This is the first beautifully designed, fully customizable paper charting workbook designed with you in mind. With 3 years worth of charting pages, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook has you covered. If you've been looking for a solid alternative to charting apps, you'll love this charting workbook. The FAMM Charting Workbook is available in both Fahrenheit and Celsius editions and is available in spiral-bound, paperback, and ebook versions. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook to order your copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/workbook. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. So the fourth theme that emerged was what they termed enduring pressure. So I thought that this was interesting. These women were enduring pressure either from their husbands, their friends, their family, or themselves. They didn't mention healthcare providers in this scenario, I think, because they mentioned that separately, which we'll get to when we get to the fifth theme that emerged. But, I would imagine that if there's pressure to be had, they might have felt it in addition, some of their other care providers. But in this particular study, they're kind of focusing on the pressure that they may have felt from others or for themselves. Now, they didn't specify if this pressure was related to their choice of using fertility awareness methods. It was more the pressure to have a child. And so they mentioned comments from, friends or family, are you going to have a baby now? Or, what's taking you guys so long? When are you going to have a kid or stuff like that? So they mentioned that type of pressure. Now, what the themes that I have seen in my practice, so they don't surprise me anymore. I don't know if surprise is the right word, but I think that if you think about this logically, if you haven't been in the field of fertility awareness, you might assume that women may face a lot of pushback from their partners about a method like this, and their partners may not be supportive. But what I found is actually the opposite in most cases, because what I've seen is that the partners understand the reasons why women are choosing these methods. So typically women who choose fertility awareness-based methods, as we talked about in some of our recent FAMM research series episodes, is they're choosing it for a specific reason. There's a specific problem that fertility awareness is allowing them to overcome. So whether that is that they had negative experiences with hormonal birth control options, or whether that is that they just are wanting to pursue a more natural life and it's in better alignment for them to come off the hormones, or whether they do have concerns about hormonal imbalances, or whatever the case, they typically have very specific kind of reasons why they've made this choice. It is a bit of a time investment, and it is a different way of doing things. When you decide to opt out of hormonal methods, you are going against the grain, and you often receive pushback from your healthcare providers, and generally kind of people out there might be like, what are you doing? And that doesn't make sense. And it's the rhythm method. And, do you want to get pregnant if you're not trying to avoid, or they might not give as much pushback if you're trying to conceive, but either way, you're going against the grain. So with that said, in terms of the question of partners and whether they're supportive or not, I found overwhelmingly that the partners in the situation tend to be. Now, that of course that doesn't mean that every partner is supportive, and there are women who find that they can't use the method if their partners are not willing to modify their kind of sexual behavior in any way, shape, or form, because obviously you need your partner's participation in order to achieve it. But I just thought it was interesting that this was one of the themes that emerged for them, and the pressure was related to kind of people just asking them all the time about when they were going to have a baby and that kind of thing, which is, of course, it's an awful part of the infertility journey for many women and couples to have to endure these questions on a regular basis. about their fertility, which are totally inappropriate. And really, we should get to a point in our culture where we're not asking people those types of questions, especially with growing awareness of fertility challenges. We should be a little bit more thoughtful. Instead of like, when are you guys going to have a baby? We should probably just like can that, because you just never know what people are going through. And so one of the quotes from the participants related to the pressure coming from, wherever it's coming from, all of their kind of closer friends and family or wider network. She said, I also think like towards the end of the year before I got pregnant, like I was starting to get kind of depressed about it. Like, why aren't I getting pregnant? And again, like everybody around me getting pregnant. And I remember it being very hard. So the last theme that emerged, of course, was lack of guidance from healthcare providers. And again, that's how they worded it. But what they identified in the research study was that one of the things that they said was that each woman made strong statements regarding the lack of guidance from healthcare providers regarding natural methods specifically. The women felt they were on their own journey of choosing fertility methods and that healthcare providers did not provide guidance on how to use natural methods. Now, I think this is really interesting because, of course, they identified this as a problem. So which it is, the researchers identified that, there's this huge hole in the information and support and guidance that is given by healthcare providers in this area. And of course, the proposed solution is to get healthcare providers to provide better information about fertility awareness-based methods. Now, this may be where my cynicism comes in, because ultimately, if I was to look at the best solution to educating women about fertility awareness-based methods, I mean, of course, it would be ideal if healthcare providers in traditional medical settings were providing this information. But the reality is that they're not. And the reason that they're not is because this is not something that is taught in medical school. And even in alternative care options, even in naturopathic settings or chiropractic or whatever, settings, fertility awareness-based methods are not taught about in depth. You may find that more of the alternative care functional providers are aware of these methods and maybe a little bit more supportive, but it doesn't mean that they are really educated about them or even that they would be supportive, because sometimes even some of the functional providers are not educated about these methods to the degree that they should be. So this is always an interesting, I don't know if I should call it a point of contention, but I suppose it's just a different outlook. So again, I'm going to call out my own cynicism here, but I'm not going to hold my breath that healthcare providers are magically going to turn around and all of a sudden we're going to get this great support and this just having the whole field, completely do a 180 and all of a sudden be really supporting women to pursue these methods and presenting them as legitimate alternatives and all of that. It's just, I don't think that we are at a stage where this would be a regular everyday part of the medical model. So I do know that, of course, there are different organizations, there's people working towards that aim who are called to improve the education knowledge of medical professionals so that this can be a reality one day. And I do hope to see the fruits of that. I'm really excited to see where that goes. So my friend and colleague, Dr. Marguerite Duane, founded FACTS, Fertility Awareness Collaborative to Teach the Science. And she's one of the most predominant faces I've seen in the medical field itself, who's really, really focused on training medical professionals, targeting specifically the medical students, because of course you're more likely to have an impact when you're addressing the medical students who have not yet been in practice for many, many years and may have a very strong bias against these natural methods, which can be very, very hard to break away from. That was one aspect of the study that I found interesting, because again, if we go back to what the researchers were hoping to accomplish, one of the things that they were hoping to accomplish is to help healthcare providers have a better understanding of the experiences of these women so that they can modify the way that they're talking about and sharing about fertility awareness-based methods. And while I think that that would be fantastic, like I said, I'm not holding my breath. Ultimately, I think that the broader solution to this lack of awareness and understanding about fertility awareness-based methods is to educate the women themselves as much as possible, to provide those resources and not necessarily depending on the healthcare setting itself to change and to provide these women with these types of alternatives. One of the reasons that I feel that way as well is if you look at the approach of fertility awareness-based methods, it goes directly in the opposite of the medical approach. So the medical approach is allopathic medicine, a pill for every ill. They're really looking to reduce symptoms in their patients, and often in the fastest ways possible. And so we know that this is typically done with drugs and with procedures to reduce symptoms specifically, and not necessarily looking at the root cause of the problem. This is just a well-known thing. And within, especially as these study participants were seeking support for fertility challenges, I mean, we know what the medical system predominantly does in the case of fertility. We're looking at a variety of different procedures, a variety of different medications to overcome the natural reproductive cycle, because that's what the approach is. The approach isn't necessarily to go and look deeper to identify those root cause issues and to fix those and all that. That takes a lot more time and effort and investigation. Our system is kind of designed to overcome a lot of those things with drugs and a variety of procedures like IVF, artificial reproductive technology options that really overcome. They take over your natural cycle, create a cycle with hormones. They provide that stimulation through the hormonal infusions so that they can kind of control, okay, so we're going to give you the estrogens so that we can build the lining. We're going to give you the trigger shot so that you can ovulate. We're going to give you the progesterone to build the lining. And then we're going to extract the egg and combine it with the sperm in one way or another. And then we're going to put it back in. So they're really taking control of the cycle. Whereas fertility awareness-based methods are more designed to allow the body to do its thing, learn about what the body's doing, and modify our actions so that it's in line with what the body was doing anyways. And then when we take it to the next level, as we teach our FAMM practitioners, we are then working to improve and optimize that natural process, improve egg quality, sperm quality, mucus production, hormone balance, so that we can more naturally encourage the body to do what it was going to do anyways, and maybe take out some of the obstacles that we might have inadvertently caused through our ineffective dietary or lifestyle factors and things that we were doing that maybe were not aiding this natural process. So that's a comment that I had. I thought it was really interesting. And I suppose that's one place where my perspective differs from that of the researchers. I just am less, to put it bluntly, I guess you could say that if I have a certain amount of time and energy to devote to this field and raising awareness, I'm not going to waste it trying to get doctors to do the opposite of what they're inclined to do, which would be to support women in these natural methods. Not that, and I'm really thankful that I'm not the only person on earth, because there's other people who have the energy and the drive to provide that education and shift that, which I think is absolutely needed. So it's just, I don't want to be the one to do it, because I find it's the thought of it exhausts me, whereas the thought of educating women directly and improving awareness in the field in different areas, that is what really lights me up. So I thought hopefully that is useful for you as a listener to kind of hear those different perspectives. But to kind of bring it home, this study, like I said, I always find these qualitative studies to be interesting and insightful in a different way. I feel like it legitimizes the voices and experiences of women, because now we have it, in print in a published study where we can look at it in a more scientific way. So instead of feeling like our experiences are just in a silo and no one really cares about them, the more that these types of qualitative studies are done, we can actually see that no, there's a pattern to this. There's a structure. These experiences of women are valid, and it can help us to better understand what's working, what some of the holes are, what some of the opportunities are within this field, what some of the challenges are that women are kind of having to overcome in order to find success, especially with regards to their choices around fertility awareness-based methods as they were looking at in this study. And something else that the researchers pointed out is that other studies who have looked at fertility awareness-based methods often highlight the relationship aspect of it. So different to what I had mentioned, but more so, a lot of women and couples will report that when they start charting their cycles and having to communicate more, because you have to communicate. This is a method where it really depends. If you're trying to conceive, you have to communicate when the fertile window is. If you're trying to avoid, you have to make plans and have a strategy for what you're going to do during your fertile days so that you're not having unprotected sex. So by nature, this forces couples to communicate more. And so many couples in various studies have reported that by implementing fertility awareness-based methods and using them and relying on them, it improves their relationship, their communication, because now all of a sudden they're having to talk about all these things. And so the researchers pointed out that this was not something that came up in this study, potentially because of the way that they asked questions, or maybe because of the focus on these women who were trying to conceive, and the focus was more on their experience in general. So I thought that that was interesting because certainly, like I said, this is a method that requires your partner's participation. So that is a common theme that does arise. And the researchers mentioned that, of course, that was not something that they looked at. Of course, as we discussed, the research study highlights the hole in our medical system and our conventional healthcare system, because not only are women not being informed and advised about these alternatives and options within their regular, visits to their healthcare practitioners, the healthcare practitioners themselves are just not made aware of these methods. So certainly, unsurprisingly, that was a theme that came up, but an opportunity for those of us who are aware of this and who do know it. Something that I think is really useful to mention is that in our FAMM classes, when we're working with our practitioners, it often comes up. I feel like I often have to remind our practitioners who are now totally in the weeds with fertility awareness. We're studying it. All of us are aware of it. All of us are jazzed and interested in it. So you found yourself in a room where everybody is really focused on improving and increasing their knowledge and awareness of fertility awareness-based methods to be able to provide additional support to clients. So it can start to feel like, well, everybody knows this and this is common knowledge. And the more you chart yourself and the more you gain that expertise, you can feel like this is common. But the reality is that it is not. And I always bring that back. I always share that. Although I've been in the field for over 2 decades, and although I fully, have written books on this now, and I teach practitioners, and I spent many years teaching clients, one-to-one and in group programs, I am under no misunderstanding or misconception that this is common knowledge. As soon as I step out into my regular life and I go to a party with friends and I'm talking to acquaintances and whatever, and if anybody asks me what I do, because I don't just go around blabbing about what I do all the time, but if anyone says, oh, what do you do for a living? Then I'll share a little bit about what I do. And every time it's something that people really haven't heard about. They're totally unaware of it. They find it really interesting and intriguing, but the average person has still not ever heard of fertility awareness. So if you are listening to this episode and you've been listening to the podcast for a while, then, remember to take a moment and maybe be thankful for the fact that you actually did learn this information, and take another moment to think about all the people in your life who you wish would chart their cycles, or you wish you could have them take an interest in this. Or just generally think about all the people in your life who literally have never heard of this stuff, who have no idea, who maybe they don't have an interest in it, but just try to remember that. I mean, there's been huge. I've had the privilege to see just this explosion in the field. So many more women are aware of their cycle. So many women are charting their cycle. There's so many apps now. There's a whole femtech business around this. So obviously there's a lot more awareness in the general sense, but we still have not, I would say, hit that critical mass where the average woman is totally aware of this stuff. The average woman still doesn't know. The average woman who's trying to get pregnant has not necessarily heard about, she might have heard about, ovulation tests, but she doesn't necessarily know about fertility awareness-based methods to optimize her chances of conception. And many, many of the 100 million women statistically that are on hormonal contraceptive have never heard of this kind of concept of a truly reliable, up to 99.4% effective birth control method that's non-hormonal, So count yourself lucky to be in the small percentage of women who are aware of fertility awareness-based methods. But I think it's also a really good reminder that we still have a long way to go. So if you are a women's health professional and you decide that this is something that you want to educate your clients about, raise awareness, and I know that's what our FAMM practitioners are aiming to do, you're really part of the solution here by raising awareness about these methods, because many of our practitioners most of their clients are not aware of this information, and so they're the ones that are shepherding them into it. So I think I'm going to wrap there. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you can think of somebody who would benefit from hearing this information, feel free to share. So the share link, fertilityfriday.com/554. If you have been enjoying our FAMM research series and you're wanting to listen to other episodes in the series, I have been doing this series here and there over the past couple of years. And so we have a number of episodes, quite a few within our series. So you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/research and you'll see the list of all of our FAMM research series episodes that you can go back and listen to. And in your podcast player, we usually kind of notate them in a certain way so that you can see the FAMM research series episodes. It's in the title, but sometimes the titles are a bit longer, so it might be harder to see. So either way, I invite you to tune in if you've been enjoying this series to some of our previous research series episodes, as we've gone through a number of interesting research papers on a variety of topics related to fertility awareness-based methods, related to fertility, conception, egg quality. We did a few episodes on AMH levels, so there's quite a few to listen to. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, or whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. And that's a wrap. If you're loving the Fertility Friday podcast, then I know you'll love FAMM, our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Certification Program. It's a 9-month program designed to teach you how to use the menstrual cycle as a diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. The menstrual cycle is the missing piece you've been looking for to better support your clients to balance hormones, normalize their cycles, and optimize their fertility. When you join FAMM, I pull back the curtain and share advanced chart interpretation strategies and specialized client protocols that will completely transform your practice. Enrollment for FAMM is opening up again in a few months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive to join the waiting list and be the first to know when early bird registration opens. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive.